My next guest this morning killed a man while he was driving. It wasn't his fault. The inquest was very clear about that. This was a dark winter's night, and Michael Rawson didn't see Jonathan Izard's car until it was too late. Jonathan is with us. Morning, Jonathan.
Good morning, Andrew.
Tell us a bit more about what happened. This was New Year's Eve, wasn't it?
That's right. New Year's Eve, December the 31st, 2015. In North Norfolk, I had, it was, as you say, it was pitch black because it was that sort of dark winter's country dark night. I'd just left a cafe at 5 o'clock. I was just driving home 2 or 3 miles, hadn't been drinking, wasn't speeding, car in perfectly good working order, had recently been serviced. It's really hard to say what happened because I really don't know. I was driving along 1 second, and then suddenly, from nowhere, it seems to me, there was somebody right in front of my car, and although of course my foot went straight on the brake, it was too late, and the sound that you do not want to hear happened. The impact happened. I pulled over instantly. I remember putting the emergency flashes on, and turned back, and there was somebody lying in the road across the White Line. It's impossible to prepare for something like that. It's impossible really to describe literally the impact. And I think it's shocking, of course, just how that second or two can then shatter lives. Obviously, Michael Rawson died from the accident, and the other lives of his friends and my life completely changed by those few seconds.
Why that? Were there other people around, or was it up to you to call 999?
There were other people around. There was some traffic. Somebody in a car behind me came to me, and by the time I got to the middle of the road, there were, I think, 2 people around. I said, has somebody called? Has somebody got a phone? It's all a bit of a blur, to be honest. I don't remember hearing any voices, although I guess people were talking. I ran down the road. I tried to stop other cars, but then afterwards I thought, well, how stupid. I was dressed in black. I didn't have a light on me. I could easily have caused another accident. But other people were being very efficient, while I think I was just in a complete chaotic sort of mental state. I remember sitting sitting down on the road. Somebody came to me and touched me on the arm, which I thought was a very nice, lovely gesture. And she said, "Don't worry, it'll be all right." And I knew it wouldn't.
I was going to ask you that, actually, whether clearly people would be busily calling emergency services, trying to direct the traffic, seeing what could be done for Michael Rawson, the man you'd hit. Tell me about people looking after you, though, because that's no doubt something you would need in that situation.
As I say, somebody said to me, "It'll be all right," and I knew that was well meant, but it wasn't true. I knew it wasn't all right. Somebody else came to me and said, "Who can we call to look after you?" And I had to rack my brains to try to get into a logical state to think who might come and collect me, look after me, take care of me, drive me away, or do what was needed. And I did then give her my phone and give a name, and she called some friends of mine to come. But the police were there, it seemed to me, within minutes. I don't know if that's true or not, because time obviously expands and contracts in those extraordinary situations. But the police came and took control, told me what to do, where to sit, what to say, sign this form, tell me in your own words. They were extraordinarily helpful and kind in what I guess for them is just another accident on just another day. But for those involved in it, it's a life-changing, life-ending experience.
Did you remember what was going through your mind at that extraordinary moment in your life? Do you have a recollection of your thought process?
There are parts that are incredibly clear, etched on my mind, and such as the hand on my left arm, "It'll be all right." The woman on my right who told me her name and said, "I'm a she said, She gave me her name and said, I'm a counsellor. Who can we call for you? And that conversation was very clear. But later on, I was told that the air ambulance had taken the casualty away, and I thought, I didn't see a helicopter, I didn't hear a helicopter, but it had landed right there, yards away. But I was completely unaware of that. So I was also spitting bits of what I thought were grit out of my mouth, thinking, why have I got grit in my mouth? And of course later I thought, oh, it's bits of the windscreen, it's shattered and I've got a mouthful of bits of glass. But so some of it is very clear, some of it has disappeared, and some of it is very confusing.
Did you think that you'd done something wrong, that in some way, shape or form you must have played a part in what happened?
That's a really difficult question. Well, it's an easy question. It's a question I ask a lot, but getting the answer is not easy. It's a really strange situation. When you know you've done something wrong, I don't know, you've told a lie, or you've made a mistake or something, you have a feeling of, oops, shouldn't have done that. But there's nothing I feel I did that I wouldn't have done the same, because I was just driving along the road, as we have all done hundreds of thousands of times. Or if we're not a driver, we have crossed the road many, many times. Everybody has been in that situation of, ooh, that was close. Ooh, nearly didn't see him. And it hasn't been an impact. We've thought, oh, gosh, that was lucky. Or we've imagined, wouldn't it be awful to be that person I heard on the radio today talking about his experience, that person I read about in the paper, the person I saw on the television. Wouldn't it be awful? And we've sort of imagined what it would be like. But there's nothing you can do to prepare for when it is you, if it is you. There was somebody who came to me from the car, I think behind me, when I was sitting in the police vehicle, and she tapped on the window and she said something like, don't blame yourself. If it hadn't been you, it would have been me. I was in the car behind. And I just thought, I wouldn't wish that on you. I don't want it to be you. I don't want it to be me either, but I would not wish this on anybody. So there are moments like that just leap out at me, seeing my hand shaking when I couldn't hold the pen, when the policeman Ted said, just sign here. I couldn't do it because my hand wouldn't hold the pen. Little tiny details like that. In answer to your question, blame and guilt and responsibility are words that jumble around in my head, and they don't really settle to into any satisfactory jigsaw that fits together. You know, what else might I have done? Why did that happen? I had examined myself in the weeks afterwards. Had I really had a gin and tonic that I'd forgotten about? Was I speeding that I didn't realise or hadn't admitted to? But there was nothing. There was no cause and effect. There was just the effect.
How did you hear that Michael had died?
He was taken to Addenbrooke's Hospital by air ambulance, first to Norwich and then later to Addenbrooke's. And I was told, I think a couple of days after the accident, that he was in a stable but critical condition. For those 6 days, I had some hope. I really allowed myself to believe that he might be badly injured, but that he would survive, and that I'd imagined visiting him and having a conversation with him and discussing what had happened and being angry with each other and apologising to each other and whatever that conversation would be. I'd allowed myself the glimpse of that. And then I had a phone call, not from the police, but from a friend of mine who said she would take any calls from the police to kind of be a buffer for me, I suppose. And she called me and she just said on the morning of the 6th of January, 6 days after the accident, she just said Michael Rawson didn't survive.
And as I think would be the case for any of us, this had a huge impact on you and your life in the subsequent months. Tell me more.
In the subsequent years, and will continue to have a huge impact. It's not something that will ever go away. I know that. I take responsibility for my actions, but I live with the fact of it. But I I can't go back and say I would do anything differently. The impact was, I suppose, if anybody has been through something similar, they might recognise some of these things: not being able to sleep unless the light was on, feeling terrified a lot of the time. I mean, just the other day, literally yesterday, I was on the phone to somebody, and a colleague of mine who wanted to just attract my attention to say, "Oh, Jonathan, I'm just going," and she just touched me on the knee, and it totally shocked me. I leapt up and I was sort of on the verge of tears and panic, just from being at work and somebody just touching me unexpectedly, and that kind of heightened awareness, extreme sensitivity to noise, to people. I feel really, really quite uncomfortable in areas where there are a lot of people. I wouldn't dream of going to a party or those sort of events unless I can be really sure that I can dip in and dip out and I know where the door is. There's a constant hyper awareness and hyper vigilance. It may sound trivial, but at the time it seemed important. I didn't shave because it felt like a great self-indulgence. I mean, partly I didn't particularly want to look in the mirror and see the face of the person who had caused this, or been involved in this, had this happened to him. I don't know the right words, but I didn't really want to see myself in the mirror. And I certainly didn't want to pay attention to how I looked. What a great self-indulgence. How could I have that, give myself that permission? I just stopped wearing anything that wasn't black. It just didn't seem appropriate to, I don't know, put on a bright red shirt or a blue jacket or something. It felt like there was some freedom to enjoy, and I didn't give myself that freedom. How could I do that when this has happened?
And the business of avoiding crowds of people and being reminded by a colleague's kindness of this, is that creating what you might describe as flashbacks in your mind, or how would you put it?
Yeah, so that's a word people use. Is it a flashback or is it a memory? I mean, this thing happened, and it's parts of it, as I say, are deeply engraved on my memory. So on my mind. So is that a memory of it? No, I suppose my friend just touching me to say I'm going, that's not a memory, but I guess that's a flashback. So I think it's a mixture of both. The memories come at all kinds of different times. Sometimes because I'm aware. I mean, like now we're talking about this. We've agreed to talk about this. This is not shocking. This is by agreement. We're discussing this thing, and so it's there in my mind now in a way that I can reasonably comfortably handle it. And if there's something you ask me that is upsetting, well, of course I'm going to get upset, but I can manage this conversation. But at other times, especially when somebody will say, just casually and not meaning to cause any upset, they will just say, oh God, that meeting, it was a complete car crash. And it's a phrase that people use. But of course, when I hear it, then I'm right back there every time. And you would be amazed how often people talk about going on a journey or had to do a handbrake turn. I was like a rabbit in the headlights. So many phrases, and each time they come, it's just wallop. It's just like another punch in the stomach, reminding me that this is part of my life.
You've talked a bit about how this incident has impacted on your behaviour. Mm-hmm. How do you think it's changed you as a person?
I think the extremes are greater, the extremes of emotion. So I'm aware I can get very angry very quickly over what somebody else might say is very, very trivial. Leave it, Jonathan, leave it. It's not important. But it kind of wells up in me, this great instant sort of fury that something has happened. Somebody has said something or done something that was really, really, bugged me hugely. And I have to remember, now, this is not your usual self. This is the new self. Just remember that. Just be aware of it and take a breath and let that fade. But I'm also hugely moved to tears by people's compassion and kindness. And it's sometimes somebody doesn't know how lovely they're being to me, but it has a huge impact on me, and they wonder why I'm feeling a bit, looking a bit teary or something. But I also am aware that I'm wanting to be kinder and nicer and more generous to people, and I think it's some weird way of saying, can I adjust the balance? Can I put something back that's good, that makes up for the bad, for the shocking, for the traumatic, for the terrible things that have happened? If I can just, as my mum would say, do your good deed for the day. Gosh, if I can do 2 or 3 or 4 of those a day, it helps me. It helps me.
And you've decided to, a couple of years on, make a program, a radio documentary about this, in which you go back and meet some of the people who Michael knew, and then visit the place where he lived, find out more about him as a person. Yeah. Why did you decide to do that?
Oh, you keep asking me these questions to which there is no simple answer, Andrew. Why did I decide to do that? The night of the accident, I was lying, being violently sick again and again, and one of the weird effects of shock I didn't know about. And I said to my friend, what do I do with this? What do I do with this? And very wisely he said, I don't know, but you will. And the first year after the accident was about survival, just getting through another day, finding a way to get through until the police inquest was over, until the police inquiry, and then the inquest, and then I could stop wearing black, and I could shave again, and I could perhaps start to socialise a bit. And so that first year was survival, but something came to me, I need to do more, and I didn't know what that might be to start with, but it felt as if I did want to go back to the place where it happened, go to visit people who knew him, and as I've said to other people, it was somehow about changing the fact of it into more than just a fact, changing a statistic into a story, changing a death into the life of the person, and it just felt a completely natural, necessary, and I hoped a possible thing to do. So I tentatively made some contacts, and I was very wary that people might be incredibly angry with me for what had happened. They might blame me, even though technically blame did not attach, legally blame did not attach, but they might still be incredibly angry. And in fact, I was met with huge kindness and compassion, almost by almost everybody I spoke to, and that encouraged me to ask a little more or go a little further. And gradually, this program became, I guess, something of I hope, a tribute to the man I killed. And I was meeting him by, our paths crossed only once in that tragic few seconds. But I feel since then I have got to know somebody who, as his friends say, I would have liked and he would have liked me. They say you'd have a lot in common, you would have some really interesting conversations. And that's an extraordinary thing to imagine. Sort of imagining back into the past, if we had known each other, we perhaps might have had some really interesting conversations. We both studied languages at the same university, not at the same time. And we both knew the same part of the world. He lived very close to where the accident happened, and I was staying there. I know it very well. And there's a notion of I don't want to be too selfish about this, but not exactly a friendship, but I do feel I've been meeting him and getting to know him in the only way that is now possible for me. It's the best I can do.
Jonathan, I'm really grateful that you were willing to talk about this. It's obviously a very, very personal and upsetting subject to you. Thank you for being on the show. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew.